The end is coming in 2050. Now, at least that's the analysis of a disastrous new climate paper published by a climate think tank and endorsed by a former Australian defense chief and senior Royal Navy commander. Now, the analysis was published by Breakthrough National Centre for Climate Restoration in Melbourne, Australia. And they describe climate change as a, quote, near to mid term existential threat to human civilization, and sets out a plausible scenario of where the business as usual could lead over the next 30 years. And, of course, over the next 30 years, it could end up being a disaster. Now, remember, given the time frame, and the context, you got to remember some of the most ambitious climate action plans do have us being renewable energy by the year 2050, which is, of course, the year that it's going to start to get really, really bad. Now, Inslee's plan, Jay Inslee, is actually the most ambitious. According to Greenpeace and according to his own plan, he wants to be 100% fossil fuel free by 2030. That is ambitious. Now, these are, of course, plans put forward by Democratic candidates for 2020. Donald Trump and the Republican Party's plan is drill, baby, drill. Privatize the gain, socialize the losses. So basically, the oil CEOs are going to make a lot of money while the planet burns. And then what? They'll be dead. And then we'll be soon after. We won't be that far behind. Now, there's, of course, an air of caution among some of these projections because, of course, they're not 100% accurate, as most climate models and projections are. Nonetheless, it kind of gives you a picture of what you might expect. Now, the paper argues that potentially extremely serious outcomes of climate change, of climate-related security threats, are often more probable than conventionally assumed. So basically, they're saying it could actually be worse, but we're not 100% sure, and we can't be. Now, the paper also goes on to say that they are, quote, almost impossible to quantify because they fall outside the human experience of the last 1,000 years. So there's a little bit of, we're not sure, we've never dealt with this before. And that's not a good thing. We can't even accurately model this because it's so far out of the range of what we've ever experienced on Earth as a race. So now here's the funny thing about that, right? About the climate models. Now you got climate deniers out there that always complain, oh, the models are too dire, they're fake. You guys are alarmists. It's not really going to happen that way. You guys are just being so alarmist and you're trying to scare the crap out of people. Well, here's this study saying, actually, no, we think those models were way too conservative. Even the UN model, which predicted 12 years, disaster if we don't do something and go 100% carbon neutral within the next under 12 years now. They said that was too conservative. And I don't mean politically conservative, I mean scientifically conservative, where they tried not to scare the crap out of people while also saying, this is what could happen, but we don't think it could happen quite as bad, but it's still going to be fairly bad. This study says, no, it's going to be bad. In fact, it's probably going to be worse than you could ever imagine. Think about that. That's not good. Now, scientists have also been overly optimistic in their models, when in reality, the ocean is, of course, near its limit in carbon dioxide. There are giant dead zones forming in the ocean where there is literally no air, so the fish cannot breathe. Yes, fish breathe oxygen. Who knew that? Sea creatures do. And when there's these giant dead zones created by climate change, they can't breathe. They die, and then what does that do to fisheries, right? Weather events have also gotten more destructive over the last few decades. Arctic ice is melting even faster than previously believed. In fact, there was a day, I think, where it was 73 degrees in one of the coldest, what's supposed to be one of the coldest places on Earth. Not minus 73, a balmy summer day. It was warmer in the Arctic than it was, I remember looking at the temperature where I live in Michigan. That's craziness. Not only that, but you have extreme temperatures in so many places. In fact, it's forecast to be 122 degrees Fahrenheit this week in India. Deadly temperatures in the middle of Australia and all over the world. I mean, think of it in this context, right? We have had overall a relatively stable climate over the span of human civilization, which actually has allowed us to create human civilization because it's been so relatively stable. What's going to happen if it's not stable? If we have an unstable climate? I'd hate to see what happens. I'd hate to see what happens to society when it becomes unstable. But that's what all these scientists are telling us. They said, on our current trajectory, the report warns, planetary and human systems are reaching a point of no return by mid-century, in which the prospect of a largely uninhabitable Earth leads to the breakdown of nations and the international order, which means, of course, anarchy, war. The scenario also warns that our current trajectory will likely lock in at least 3 degrees Celsius of global heating, which in turn could trigger further amplifying feedback effects, unleashing further warming. This would drive the accelerating collapse of key ecosystems, including coral reef systems, the Amazon rainforest, and in the Arctic. Now, all that Arctic ice melts. Well, what's ice made out of? Water. That's going to rise the oceans, right? Not only that, coastal destruction. Where's a lot of our cities built? On the coastlines. So that's a disaster. Massive migrations into the interiors of the country. Not only that, but if it's going to wreck the Amazon, what do they call the Amazon? Oh, right, it's the lungs of the world. We lose that, we're also screwed. Some 1 billion people would be forced to attempt to relocate from unlivable conditions. You think migration is bad now? Alt-righters, well, it's about to get worse as we move further into this century. 2 billion would face scarcity of water supplies, agriculture would collapse in the subtropics, and food production would suffer dramatically worldwide. The internal cohesion of nation states like the US and China would unravel. They said even for 2 degrees Celsius of warming, which, by the way, that was the goal of the Paris Climate Agreement, to not get above 2 degrees Celsius, which, by the way, Trump backed out of, says that more than 1 billion people may need to be relocated, and in high-end scenarios, the scale of destruction is beyond our capacity to model, with a high likelihood of human civilization coming to an end. Absorb that for a second. These scenarios, on the worst, say that's it. Human civilization, you had a good run, but you done messed it up. That's it. Now, there is a reason. There is a way to avoid this, of course. And they say, in the report, they describe the only way to avoid the risks of these scenarios is to mobilize akin in scale to the World War II emergency mobilization. But this time focused on rapidly building out a zero-emissions industrial system to set and train the restoration of a safe climate. Now, the end of our civilization. We can avoid it. We still have a little bit of time, but not much. Not much at all. And the more time that goes by, the less likely we're able to pull off the amount of necessary transformational change that is needed to avoid this. Now, we can do it, but we have to have the political will. Now, I got to ask you, defenders of Western civilization, right? Is that all? If that's all you care about, where are you guys? This is the end of civilization. You said it started in the West. Well, then I guess maybe, according to you and your racist mind, maybe the West should be able to fix it. Because right now, the West is the problem. Again, the creators of civilization, right? What about the pro-lifers? It's very pro-life to let pretty much millions, billions of people die. Where are you? Where are you? We're looking straight into the abyss here. It is coming. It's coming. Are you going to do something about it? Oh, of course not. Fake news, you'll probably say. Alarmists is the other word. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to let you guys drag us down with you. Hell no. Now, for those of you who are still not quite sure and are on the fence, let's look at who wrote this. The new policy briefing was written by a man named David Spratt, Breakthrough Research's director, and Ian Dunlop. Ian Dunlop is an interesting case because he was a former senior executive at Royal Dutch Shell, who also previously chaired the Australian Coal Association. This guy was one of them. He made money off pollution, off creating climate change. And then he looked at the evidence, I assume, and he said, I'm wrong. And that I need to help us fix this problem before we destroy ourselves. And it's not just them. As I mentioned earlier, you had members of the Australian military. In the briefing's foreword, retired Admiral Chris Berry, Chief of the Australian Defence Force from 1998 to 2002, and former Deputy Chief of the Australian Navy, commends the paper for laying, quote, bare the unvarnished truth about the desperate situation humans and our planet are in, painting a disturbing picture of the real possibility that human life on Earth may be on the way to extinction in the most horrible way. A high-end 2050 scenario, they said, finds a world in social breakdown and outright chaos. But a short window of opportunity exists for an emergency, global mobilization of resources in which the logistical and planning experiences of the national security sector could play a valuable role. Well, there you go. Defense contractors, here's your new job. Instead of bombing brown people in the Middle East, why don't you work to save our planet? That'd be fantastic. And save our species instead of bombing the crap out part of them. But look, overall, I don't want to leave you with a completely terrible message, because in the midst of all this doom and gloom in this report, there is a little bit of hope. And that's what we're trying to get through to you, right? And again, the implications are dire. And even if it's not the worst case scenario, it's not going to be great. But again, I got to stress, there is some hope, but only if we mobilize, only if we do something. We put forward our resources, which means, by the way, jobs, investment, working together from common cause, and fight for our world. Nothing but good can come from that kind of cooperation. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on, and you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.